All right, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Scott Heist. I'm the senior trainer here at Abacus Next. I see some familiar names out there in the crowd, so welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about case creation via the intake process. Before we get started, just by show of hands, if you could please click your little hand raising button just to let me know that you can see my AbacusLaw screen. Okay, you should be able to see my mouse moving around. All right, thanks everybody, appreciate that. And then I'll go ahead and assume that you can obviously hear me since you just followed those instructions, and I'll lower your hands. I also have my colleague Amanda on with us today. She is going to be reading off the questions at the end of our session. So go ahead and, any questions that you have, throw those into the chat box there so we can get to as many as possible towards the end of our session. That's why you're muted, by the way, in case you didn't notice. We don't want people talking over each other, so please put those questions into the chat box. If we can't get to your questions, don't worry, we track all of those with your email addresses, so we will be able to follow up with you after this session, either today or at the latest by end of business tomorrow. I will follow up with any questions we can't get to. And also, we are recording this, so you'll have access to that recording. You'll receive an email, that gives you a link on how to access this. So we'll go ahead and get down to it. The AbacusLaw intake process, really is designed to do two things, two very, very important things. The first is to get your records created. So when I say records, I obviously mean your matter record, but then I also mean, contact records, name records that go along with the case, like the respondent or, whoever it may be, the plaintiff, the defendant, the opposing counsel, the insurance adjuster, things like that. So all of those records are supposed to get created, or at least, some of them should get created right at the initial intake process. And then also the second thing is to get calendar items set up. Okay, so this is actually a part of the intake process that a lot of people don't realize can be done, and I always like to show them this on our training sessions. You can attach calendar rules to your intake forms, and that's a huge feature. So if you have, like X amount of things that you always have to do whenever you take on a new case, like, run a conflict check and file certain forms or set up the statute of limitations reminders and things like that, those are calendar events that the system can automatically create for you during that intake form process, okay? So those are the two things I want you to keep in mind, and I'll do my best to cover as much as possible in the short amount of time that we have. So first things first, let's jump into our intake form menu. If you've never looked and seen that menu before, you just click the little intake button on the toolbar, and that will show you a whole list of different intake forms. Now, obviously, my list is going to be way more detailed than yours because I have a bunch of our legal solutions installed inside of my program. So I've got, everything from real estate to civil to criminal defense and all that good stuff. So if you're wanting to get customized intake forms for your practice area, please just note that you can actually purchase those PALs directly from us, and we can get those set up for you. So give me just 1 second. I'll pull one of these open. And as you can see here, I'm going to use the new case client plaintiff intake form. And what this is just a form that we're utilizing here to fill in as much information as we have right out of the gate. So we don't have to put in every piece of information that we're going to have, but we definitely want to put in at least enough information to get our records created. So for this particular intake form, I have a section here specific for case info. So this is basic case info. And then as you scroll down, you can see that I also have sections here for contact information, like my client's info. And then as we scroll down farther, we have contact information for our defense party. We also have contact information for opposing counsel, and then a section here for background on the case. Now, depending upon the intake form that you utilize, this information that it's asking you for may vary. So this was a civil litigation case, right? If I close out of that and I go back to my intake form menu, and let's say we do a personal injury case, maybe like a vehicle accident or something like that, this intake form is going to look different, right? Because this is catered towards the personal injury area. So I'm going to have stuff in here like make and model of vehicle and insurance policy information, passenger information, you know, all of that good stuff, okay? So first thing you want to do is definitely make sure you become familiar with the intake forms that you have in your program. That's step one, okay? And then as you're looking over these intake forms, decide how you would tweak these intake forms to, you know, kind of better suit your practice. Now I'm going to do a very basic intake form here, and I'll do new case client plaintiff. This is a generic intake form that comes with all of the Abacus programs, just so you know. And then I'll go ahead and I'll fill in this info, and then I want you to watch me as I do this, okay, as I work through this form. I'm not going to fill in every field just for times purposes, but I'll fill in a decent amount, and then I want you to watch what happens when I get done. Okay, so as you can see there, what I did was I just filled in basic information. Now, one thing you should know about these intake forms, if you enter in a name, okay, first and last name that already exists in your system, the program will actually catch that and it will alert you to it. It'll say, hey, you know, Johnny Doe already exists as a contact. Do you want to add a person with the same name? And then at that point, you can check to see if Johnny is a duplicate. Okay, maybe you represented him in the past, or maybe they just coincidentally have the same name. Okay, if you ever want to check that, you can always click the button right here that says use existing name, and that will run a check. So what you can see is it actually found one that was pretty close. It saw the word Doe, okay, and this was actually John Doe instead of Johnny Doe. So this is our opportunity to look at this and say, you know, are these the same people? And maybe he just goes by Johnny now. We can look at, you know, that personal info and make that decision. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So as we're filling out this information, okay, you're going to fill in as much as you have. And then in the bottom right, when you click that button that says create records and close, what the system's going to do is it's going to work through your form. It's going to check for required fields. And then it's going to pull up this window here that says creating events from a rule. Now, the rule that I have attached to this intake form is called the new case rule. And what my new case rule entails are things like running conflict checks, you know, creating the fee agreement, sending that fee agreement out, checking on the response to the fee agreement, you know, setting up my general ledger, you know, different things like that. So this is what I mean by calendar events that can be assigned to an intake form. So that way, when you fill the intake form out, that not only is, you know, the system creating all the records, but it's also scheduling those priority new case events that have to be scheduled. So at this point, I would say, in response to, do you want the related event scheduled? I would say, yes, I do. And there we go, okay? There are my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 events, okay, that are going to get calendared. Notice the dates here that the system is going to put those on just based off of my rule, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But I'm meeting with my client, I'm opening my billing account, I'm running my conflict check, I'm sending my confirmation letter, I'm drafting my fee contract. So these are 6 events that I don't need to worry about going to my calendar and creating. The program's going to automatically do that for me, and that's why this is such a great feature. So when I click done here, not only have I set up my cases, okay, in AbacusLaw, but I've also calendared the initial calendar event, and now I'm actually able to enter in some default accounting information if you're utilizing our accounting program. So when I say accounting information, I mean things like minimum retainer that's operating, minimum trust retainer, any prior balances, and then importantly here, the billing frequency and the billing mode. Is this an hourly case? Is this a flat fee case? Is it a contingency case? I get to choose all that, okay? But once I click done, that creates my case records, okay? And calendars my events and sets my case up in accounting. So my end result that I'm left with here is in my matters database, there's my case, Doe v. Gates, okay? And if I open that up, what do I have here? I have a matter, okay, that has basic information about the case. And then if I go to my linked names tab, I have my contacts linked. Notice I have my client record created and linked, who also happens to be the billing party, okay, the person picking up the bill. And then I've got my defendant linked as well. So the name record for Mr. Gates here is created as well. And these are actual name records. If I double click on Mr. Gates' record name here, that's going to actually open up that person's name record, okay? So it does all those records for me. Also on our events tab, look at all of our events. We didn't have to go to the calendar and calendar any of those, okay? The system did it for us, okay? So I guess the moral of the intake story is it's much easier to start your case using an intake form, okay, than it is to go into each database and click the add button and create your matter, and then go into the names database and click add and create all the names, and then have to remember to link them all together. You don't have to do that, okay? That's the old way. The new way is using the intake form so that the program does the work for you, okay? Now, if you want to tweak these intake forms, remember I said, these are just, templates that come with the program, okay, or templates that come with your specialty versions. If you want to tweak these, you can do that by going into your form manager, okay, and you get to your intake form manager by just going to File, Setup, Intake Form Manager, okay. This is going to show you a list of all of your intake forms, and then you just need to choose the intake form that you're looking for, okay? And I'll just do, new contact form just for training purposes. You would just highlight it, click edit, and then inside of the wizard, you would just, edit your fields and, edit your records and things like that. We actually do conduct training on customizing intake forms. So if you're interested in learning more on how to customize your intake forms, please email us at training@abacusnext.com and we can set that up for you, okay? But just so you know, that's how you get to the intake form manager. File, Setup, Intake Form Manager, okay? About 3/4 of the way down there. Now, the second part to that intake process that I said was very important was the rules process, right? The scheduling of the rule. It's important for you to know your rules anyway, whether you're doing, whether you're utilizing them in the intake process or you're just utilizing them on the calendar. So if you need to access your rules and become familiar with the ones that you have, you want to go to File, Setup, Rules. Okay, this is your library of rules. Now, everybody's rules list may be a little bit different. Again, it's going to kind of depend on whether or not you've purchased local, federal, state rules from us, or if you've purchased any specialty versions like criminal defense or PI or family law. Everything kind of varies depending upon the package that you have. But what I would recommend, if you want to become familiar with your rules, just look for some of the new case rules, because these are the new rules that are automatically assigned to your intake forms. So for instance, that intake form that I showed you guys, that's the new case rule right here that it utilizes, conveniently titled new case. So if I want to edit this, or I want to see what this rule entails, just highlight it and click edit. Okay, and here are all of your events associated with the rule. Okay, you can delete events out of this rule, you can add events to the rule, and you can set up the appropriate intervals. Okay, so if, you know, on day 0, when you meet with your client, if you always do an email follow-up with the client 48 hours later, just to say, hey, thanks for meeting with me, you can create an event in the rule that calendars that for you. Okay, if you think about like an SOL, right? If we look at one of these SOL rules, we don't want to find out about the expiration of the SOL on the day it expires, right? That would be pretty disastrous. So what we want to have is we want to have a rule set up for our SOLs that have reminders leading up to that expiration date. So if you look here, we've got 6-month reminders, 3-month reminders, 1 month, 7 days, 1 day, all leading up to that expiration date. So these are all examples of the different rules that you can actually attach to those intake forms. So I will leave you with this before we get into your questions. Step 1, you have to become familiar with the intake forms that you have, and you have to decide, how would I edit these intake forms to be better suited to my practice? Okay, so you got to do that by looking at the ones that you have, and then just making note of, you know, what fields would I add, what fields would I remove. If you want to try that on your own, you know, and we do have steps to do it inside of the reference guide if you check that, but you just go into File, Setup, Intake Form Manager, and that's where you edit your intake forms. For rules, got to become familiar with those too. So you just go to File, Setup, Rules, and that will show you all of the rules that you have with your program. You can add your own rules, or you can edit existing rules and add, you know, things to them, or remove things that aren't needed. Okay, so you've got to become familiar with, you know, what you have installed in your program. And then once you do that and you have a good feel for what you're working with, now it's time to decide how would you tweak it to better suit your practice. And we can definitely train you on how to do that. Again, just shoot us an email, training@abacusnext.com, and we will get that scheduled for you. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amanda, and she's going to read off your questions, and I'll do my best to answer as many as possible.
Thank you so much, Scott. Okay, our first question is from Sherry, and she wants to know, do you have staff or attorneys enter the intake form, or do clients enter their information?
So the good news about that is that intake forms can be both internal and external. So every intake form that you see inside of your list can actually be turned into a web intake form. Okay, here's my here's kind of my rule of thumb on that, and I think you guys will all agree. If we're going to be putting the intake form on our website, in other words, if we're going to be empowering the website or the client, the potential client, to go to our website and fill in this information, we really need to try and keep it as simple as possible. Because, and I think you'll agree, the more questions and legal focused things that we put on that web form, the more confused the client ends up. So if you're looking to just get the client's contact information into your system, you know, that's a great example of like a new contact form that I would put on my website. Okay, but I wouldn't recommend putting like a personal injury, you know, vehicle accident intake form, or at least not this one that has, 300 fields on it. I wouldn't recommend putting this on my website and having the client fill it out unless you're going to do it with them. This would be more of one of those forms that you could potentially print out and maybe sit with the client and do the intake form with them, or print it, have them fill in as much information as possible, and then, you can always go back later and fill in the information that you need. So the answer is really both. They can, strictly internal, and also they can also be web-based. And if you want more training on how to make them web-based, please let us know and we can show you how to do it. It's very easy.
Thank you, Scott. So our next question is, can you only implement rules from the intake form?
Absolutely not. That is just a more of an efficiency feature, for those new case rules that you're, like I said, those 10 things you always do when you take on a new case, like running that conflict check and, drafting that fee agreement, or maybe, even if it's a potential case, sending that non-rep letter. When you are in your calendar, okay, like if you have your calendar open, you can always kick off a rule from your calendar, which is very common when we get trial dates, right? When the judge says, okay, first trial date is this day, right? Well, what happens every time we get a trial date, right? We've got 100 things we got to do before that, and we got 50 things we got to do after. Think about like your civil procedure rules and stuff like that, and your superior court rules. Those kind of things get kicked off directly from the calendar. So you would just go to the kickoff date, whatever it may be, like the trial date, and you can actually just right-click on your calendar and select Add Event from a rule. And that opens up that same rule menu that I showed you before, okay? So like civil litigation response, right, or civil trial date, I could use that rule right now, okay, and just go to the date that that civil trial is scheduled for, and then the system would, calendar everything associated with that rule. And again, if you want to see those things, just highlight the rule and click Edit, and it shows you, okay? So I think the general rule, though, is, and this will make sense for anybody out there who has our rule packages, like our local rules and our civil procedure rules, you don't really want to edit those rules unless you're just adding additional reminders, because we do get those rules, from the courts. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, you can always kick a rule off directly from your calendar. It doesn't have to be from an intake.
Okay, our next question is from Lonnie, and she wants to know, when I prepare an abacus form, all of the information added in the intake form should automatically be imputed on the form. What if the case number does not appear even after entering it in the intake form?
So if the case number, so let's say we run through an intake form, okay, and there's different scenarios that could occur in, okay. It really depends on whether or not you manually enter your case numbers, or if you allow Abacus to auto-generate your case numbers. So you can see on my form, I don't have a field for case number, okay? Because I actually allow Abacus to auto-generate my case numbers, which is, either way is fine. There's no wrong answer to that. But I will tell you this, if you have a field on your intake form for case number and you're typing something in and you are creating those records using that button in the bottom right, and then when you open up that matter record, you don't see a case number, that's a problem. That tells me that you don't have either case number or file number on that screen. So that's a red flag to me. So I would double check that. And if that is in fact the case, if you do not have a field on there that says file number or case number, please let us know. You can contact our support team, and we will take a look at that and find out why. Perhaps somebody edited your screens and removed that field, which I never recommend doing. So we'd have to take a closer look at that. But in theory, yeah, when you use an intake form, whether you're manually typing in the case number or even if the system's auto-generating, that field should always show on the matter record once it's created.
Okay, great. Our next question from Rochella is, once a rule associated with an intake form is added to the calendar of the assigned attorney, how can we add it to additional firm members' calendars?
So the cool thing is you can actually do that in the rule. Now, in that scenario, usually what ends up happening is you know the primary person who's associated with the case, but you don't know what additional staff is going to work the case. We see this with like medium to larger firms. You know who the attorney is because that's what they always do. They always do real estate law, but you don't know who the support staff is going to be. So if that's the case, what you can do is, once the events are created, you can always go right into that matter. And on that events tab, you have the option of just opening these events and adding additional, people. Like if I wanted to say like this opening the billing account event, I could come in here and I can just start adding the initials of additional people, okay? Now, does that add some extra clicks for you? Certainly. Now, if like let's say Sally, the attorney, always has these 3 staff members that work on her cases with her, then you could actually create a rule that has that built in, okay? So inside of my rules, and I'm just going to choose a random one here and click edit, you will notice, let's see, under the event details, there is a who button, a who field, okay? And in this who field, you can choose which who codes are always going to be associated with that step in the event, okay? So for instance, if we look at this event right here, and let's say mail notice of deposition to client, okay? Let's say there's only one person in our office that always mails out the depo notices. Then we can actually go into this step, click edit, go to our event details window or tab, and we can put that person's who code right here, right in there, okay? So now the system automatically assigns that event to that person, or maybe even to, to multiple people. You can choose multiple people, okay? So that's 2 ways you could do it. You'll really just have to find which way is more efficient for your internal workflow.
Great, thank you, Scott. We have time for one more quick question. So Cheryl would like to know, does the Abacus calendar sync with MS Outlook?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're compatible with, I believe it's all the way back to 2010 Outlook. So as long as you have like 2010 or newer, there should be no problem syncing whatsoever, including, the newer Office 365. And if you're curious about setting that up, you're welcome to do so. We're also welcome, we'll help you with that. So if you need us to set it up for you, we can do that. But the way you can check to see if yours is set up to sync is by going to File, Setup, User Preferences. And you'll notice in the User Preferences window, there's a little tab that says Printing/Email. And in the bottom right, there's a section that says Email Program. Now, I know it says Email Program, and you're asking about the calendar, but it's, Outlook is primarily an email program, so that's why it says that. But you would basically just choose MS Outlook, and then click Setup. And then you'll notice a checkbox there that says Enable Outlook Sync. Okay? Now, obviously, for this to happen, you have to have Outlook installed on your computer, okay, so that Abacus can interact with it. And you have the ability to sync at different intervals. 5 minutes is about as close to real time as we can get you. So that's still very, very quick. So you can utilize that feature to set that up so that it syncs back and forth. Here's my general rule and my tip that I tell everybody during training. You purchased Abacus to be a case management tool, okay? That includes your calendar, right? We're in the legal industry. We live and die by our calendar. So you should always make, even if you are syncing to Outlook, you should always make the Abacus calendar your primary point of data entry as much as possible. Now, I understand there are going to be times when you're out of the office and maybe you don't have our Abacus private cloud, so you can't access the program from anywhere. And you have to enter it maybe on your phone or directly into your Outlook. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. But you just want to remember, don't then get back to your office and enter it into Abacus, okay, because you're going to end up with a duplicate. So always try and make Abacus your primary, point of data entry, and then have it sync over to Outlook. So the short answer to your question is yes, we're totally compatible with Microsoft Outlook.
Great. Well, thank you, Scott. That is all the time we have today. Thank you for listening to today's Abacus Law webinar. As a reminder, the webinar will be sent to you via email and will also be available on our website. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.